So everybody should look to have as early as possible as much experience as possible, and then maybe look for some kind of structured learning framework. Might be university, might be a training provider, something like this, where you can add this structure, and especially, and that's the relevant thing, you might learn in a university context, methodical skills, how to think, how to write, how to analyze, and so forth. All these kind of methodology skills you would need. And in most of the cases, it's more difficult to train it for yourself. And this combined with experience and, of course, social competence, personal competence, and a nice network built from the early ages is the perfect portfolio guaranteeing or making higher probability of success.
Gerold, thanks for joining us to Investing Insights episode number 1. It's great to have the mind behind investing in front of the camera, talking to our community. And you finished university when I was born. There are a lot of stories we could talk about. So many more podcast series will most likely come. But let's maybe start first in Austria, where you and I both have our roots. And I would like to understand a bit, like coming from this rural background in Austria, then moving to Graz, working in a more, let's say, artsy university environment, later moving into the financial world of Frankfurt. How has your personal mindset about finance and money shifted and evolved throughout all of those years?
Well, pleasure being here. Very nice. Actually, thinking about my childhood and youth, money somehow on the surface was not a subject at all. It's positive and negative, of course. On one side, it means that obviously in my family, my parents had at least enough money so that it wasn't a daily subject or topic or challenge or whatsoever. On the other side, as you grow up without money talk or financials or something like else, you, of course, are not developing any kind of sense for money, investing, and related topics. So you grow up in a perfect childhood and a perfect youth beyond money with a lot of nature and the force. But once you get 18 or something like, and you study and you have to rely on your own. Also, you're supported with money and so forth by your parents as long as you study. You surface new challenges you are not used to as you surface money as a topic. You have to, the first time from your 18th year, for the first time, you have to think about money and how to spend it. You receive monthly payment and you have to think how to spend it. And that's a challenge, unfortunately.
So then comes the moment where you have to take some risk because you have to decide, what do I do with my money? Do I just save it? Do I spend it on travels and party in my next business venture? And knowing how in Austria we have a more of a conservative thinking about it, what something that maybe worked a few centuries ago was having a savings account where you get some returns on your money, and then maybe finally being able to buy your own home, being able to really build your own house. Is that something that was for you, something that was important in your life, or did you consider this as something low risk or high risk? And how did this evolve for you, taking those first financial decisions on your own?
Well, actually, following up to my comments, I always was lucky when it was about money. So from my 18th birthday, so to speak, when I started studying, the first couple of years, the money was available from my parents' side and also from my grandparents' side. And then quite sudden, I think, as far as I can remember, when I was something like 24, at the end of my studies, my father died and I received some kind of pension, if you like. And at the same moment, I was with some kind of erratic biography until then. I walked into certain arrears and I automatically received some money offers or income offers or task or project or something. So money continued not being a main topic or a challenge. The first time when I started thinking about was I was running some kind of music club in Graz, in the town of my studies, and it was quite successful, and therefore there was a lot of money. Suddenly, more money than I could spend within the next month, because that was the challenge. How do I spend it? Yeah, I didn't waste it, but I spent it, so maybe a little bit left on the account at the end of the month. But suddenly we had more than enough. I had more than enough, and this was the moment. I think it was something like 26, when I started thinking about, okay, what a pity there's such a huge amount of money on my banking account. And at the same time, as in my families around. There were a couple of guys, investment bank or something like this. I started, okay, it would be maybe interesting to think about investing this money. And that's why I started doing a little bit research. One shouldn't forget it was in the early or in the mid of the 90s. So internet was not really present. It already existed. I got access via university, but it was a joke in comparison to today. But I started to do a little bit research. I saw, okay, there is some kind of, there are financial markets, stock markets in Germany, in the US. There are stocks, there are shares, there are other things. And one, I thought, could invest a little bit of money into this. But additionally, shouldn't forget, this time, there was no internet broker. There was no internet banking yet. So it was not that easy to say, okay, I start the browser. I look for a perfect broker or online bank or something like this. And I started depot, an account or something like this. No, you had to go to a certain bank, to the branch of a certain bank, and you have to say something like this. So you couldn't trade with stocks in a direct way as a retail investor, as it's called today. And these existing barriers prevented me additional couples of years to start really being active in this area.
And I assume you had to figure out all of that on your own.
Yes, of course. That's the point. No mentor around.
Yeah. I was lucky because I had you mentoring me and really remembering when I was like 28, saying like, Georg, do something with your money. It's really important to start investing early. Could you maybe highlight this again? Why is it so important starting early? Why cannot someone say, I just make money and when I'm 45, then I will take care of my finances and my investing? Could you maybe elaborate a bit on that?
It's just that simple. You have this long-term effect. One thinks maybe invest. I don't know. Nowadays, ETFs are very fashionable. So you read and say, this is a quite safe ETF is low risk and it's just 5 or 6% per year. And in people's mind, normally you imagine, okay, so maybe it's 60, 70% in 10 or 15 years. But that's not true. Starting with 45, for example, and doing it 20 years until you're 65, normally you retire. And the difference starting with 25 or 30 is a huge difference. You won't have twice of the money, but maybe 6 to 7 times. That's the effect of long-term investing. And that's the reason why it's important to start as early as possible. The best case with 4 or 5 in the kindergarten or something like this.
Yeah, you mentioned it. It's far more accessible right now. How are you able to buy your first, let's say, stocks? So really financial products from the financial markets. I mean, later you lived in Frankfurt. Did you have to go to the broker or to the stock exchange and buy it there?
No. As you already mentioned, I think in 1999, I left Austria for other reasons, not for finance reasons, artificial intelligence reasons. I went to Frankfurt, one of the main financial capitals in Europe beside London, the financial capital of continental Europe, still today. So most of the private banks disappeared meantime. And as this certain startup project I was participating in was related to a private financial university in Frankfurt, I got in contact with notorious people, so to speak, from an ironic point of view. So people from the restaurant area too. And this inspiration, being surrounded by these people, this new biodope or the ecosystem or whatsoever, completely different to my ecosystem and my environment in Graz, which was rather scientific and artistic and something like this. I got enough inspiration to deepen my interest and to start acting. And as far as I can remember, it's not yesterday, I started an online account. Yes, I started an online account in 1999 at a German broker online bank it still exists, called Consors Bank. So it was possible to start an online account. It was not a depot. It was not a brokerage account in a direct way, but it was an online account, but it was strongly focused on investing. And that's when I started. I think it was in November 1999. So maybe there's some kind of anniversary nearby now. 26 years, as far as I can count. So 26 years ago. And the nice thing was, it was easier, so to speak, than today. Why? Because the choice, the possibility of select out of 1,000 shares and other financial products wasn't available. You had a couple of stocks, you had a couple of shares. It was rather difficult and quite expensive to buy, for example, American shares or other assets. So in the first time I was focused on German stocks from DAX 30 and other indices from the German stock market. And I can't remember, but it was not relevant. I bought it. And the nice thing then was, and that's an additional motivation why I started, then, and then until I think 2000 or 2001, you didn't have to pay taxes after 1 year of holding a certain stock or something like this. It was very nice, but they finished it, they stopped it, I think, in 2000 or 2001. That's how my access looked like. Just that simple. I invested something like, I don't know, 20, 30,000 euros, and I didn't really care as everything was a little bit more difficult. Day trading was not really a topic and not really available for retail investors. So I kept my fingers out of it. I looked into my account something like weekly, but it developed and it was not really relevant.
But interesting how you explain you move from one city to another. You have completely different environment of friends or business partners, and how that immediately shapes your focus onto different topics. Because it was not just the financial topic, you also started to work on AI. Is this right? How can I imagine an AI development in the end of the 90s? I remember I played some computer games, the first ones, so there were some things maybe moving, which you could call some AI, where something happened after you did something, but maybe you could highlight that a bit for us.
Well, from today's perspective, it was rather awkward in comparison to today's possibilities and progress. The main difference between then and today was the computation power you had available, which was a joke, and the training data you had access to, as internet was not really, even in 1999, not really fast and stuffed with huge amounts of data. So we were very restricted, but of course we didn't know, as it was the present and we couldn't foresee the future. There were already this main paradigm of neural networks and algorithms, of course. We had a certain approach. I don't want to go into details, but the interesting thing might be that the context or the expectations towards this startup we started to build up as money came from financial industry. They expected significant added value when it's about prognosis of the development of financial markets, different segments, different shares, and so forth. That was the expectation and the mission, so to speak, of this startup. Nowadays, looking at artificial intelligence nowadays, it's nice, it's really nice. It's a nice project then. It was a nice project then, but it's incredible. So, but also to make some kind of bridging, of course we failed. That's clear. There's nothing to hide. We completely failed because the idea, the vision, the expectations, and all the things didn't match the reality. Because to give you an example, nowadays, if you have some kind of artificial intelligence, visual computation, visual artificial intelligence, it's not any problem for some kind of artificial intelligence software to recognize an object. Doesn't matter from which perspective this object looks. To recognize you, for example, just based on one photo they did and so forth. Then in these days, if you wanted to make artificial intelligence program recognize some kind of, for example, a Matchbox car, you had to make at least a couple of thousands photographs and video shots of this Matchbox car from any possible perspective and angle. Otherwise, the artificial intelligence failed, thinking these are 2 or 1,000 completely different Matchbox cars. And taking these really restricted possibilities and projecting it on some hopefully projections and prognosis within financial markets can show you that we had to fail. We simply had to fail. It was some kind of science fiction project, and it was really, really interesting because I learned a lot about how human beings learn. And actually, then during this 2.5 years working as a program manager in this project and dealing and digging deep into the question of learning psychology and how to develop competence as a model for artificial intelligence, it was significant. And from then, actually, my interest in how to learn in the best possible way was some kind of red line during the following decades in my life.
That's interesting. Yeah, because later you worked on several projects in higher education, building university programs, even co-founding a university in Hamburg, the Brand University. So if I ask you today, like having both of this background, deep expertise in higher education where you get formal degrees and where you can prepare for career, but also knowing the extreme development that we had now in AI, what do you consider as being more relevant and more important? Formal degree, maybe a specific skill, or is it just knowing the right people and having the right network?
Of course, a formal degree is rather irrelevant in most of the cases. As far as you could see within this, at least last 16 to 17 years since we have been founding Brand University, analyzing other universities, both private universities and public universities, both in Germany and abroad. 95% of any bachelor and master program is not really relevant when it's about developing competence. It can be a nice framework, especially when you're studying at university, so-called universities in Germany. It's called University of Applied Sciences. That means it's rather applied. You have a huge amount of training parts, not memorizing information and the thing. You have to practice. There are people from the industries included. They're training you, they're mentoring you, they're coaching you, and so forth. But nevertheless, making your own experiences and maybe then having some kind of mentor or coach, analyzing your experiences and giving you structure, a structural framework, has much higher value than just doing 3 years of a bachelor program or 2 years of a master program and collecting some kind of certificate and showing off the certificate. In most of the cases, when you start working in a company, wherever, in what kind of an industry ever, you nearly have to start from zero. And that's still a problem. Also, and then you have regulations within European Union, how to develop a master bachelor program, accreditations, all these things. So everybody should look to have as early as possible, as much experience as possible, and then maybe look for some kind of structured learning framework. Might be university, might be a training provider, something like this, where you can add this structure, and especially, and that's the relevant thing, you might learn in a university context, methodical skills, how to think, how to write, how to analyze, and so forth. All these kinds of methodical skills you would need. And in most of the cases, it's more difficult to train it for yourself. And this combined with experience and, of course, social competence, personal competence, and a nice network built from the early ages is the perfect portfolio, guaranteeing or making higher probability of success. However you define success for yourself, completely different. I'm not talking about career, talking about having goals, visions, defining a strategy and reaching whatever you would like to reach. Some people want to get rich. Some people want to become CEOs. Other people want to live in the woods and so forth. So success is not only related to commercial, career related or financial success. So learning by doing, to sum it up, learning by doing in a structured framework, from my experience, seems to be the best way. And it's the same when it's about financial competence, investing competence, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because all this knowledge that we usually have to gather first nowadays, we can get it much easier through AI. And it's really about applying it in the right setting. Talking about the investing then, like what motivated you to say, okay, let's build a training program for people to learn how to invest? What's your underlying motivation? What was for you essential what this program has to have then?
The point is, since I started in 1999, as I mentioned, I was always looking for some kind of developing my competence when it's about investing. And you also shouldn't forget, YouTube didn't really exist then. It was not relevant. Social media too. So the sources in the internet were restricted. And I always had this urge, as I'm a rather methodical, analytic guy. So I want to understand things and their structure and their single parts and how it is built together. So I always had this urge to find some kind of further education when it's about developing my investment skills, my financial literacy, as it's called nowadays. And I couldn't find it. And I couldn't find it actually until today. I couldn't find anything from any provider that would satisfy me. Most of the cases, it's just, for example, a pile of videos without any structure, curriculum from A to Z, or it's a pile of texts, or it's a glossary, or what, you name it. But it never supported my intention to build up a structured knowledge about the essential things, like an encyclopedia or something, and to support me developing these applied skills, because that's what's relevant. It wouldn't help to have an encyclopedic knowledge about any aspect of financial markets, and then you can't trade or invest because you didn't train, you have no experience, therefore you have no competence. And that's the reason. I wasn't desperate, but I was really more and more, excuse my French, pissed off because and I couldn't understand. Everybody wants to get rich. There are a huge financial industry also related to retail investors, but also the brokers up to today aren't interested, either not interested or not inspired to provide something like a structured financial course about this thing. And maybe there's also a lack of competence because you have to buy, or you have to have better pedagogical competence. You have to know how to build a learning concept which provides best possible support for developing competence, financial investing competence in a structured way. Maybe that's also a problem. We have financial industry, we have brokers with the legal obligation to provide some kind of information so that your customers, your clients are not stupid and you prevent them from ruining themselves or something like this. But it's just by law. And obviously, that's my interpretation of the situation. Nobody thinks about, for example, cooperating with some kind of university or financial education institution or something like this. And that's when I decided, also based on my knowledge about learning and higher education and further education and so forth, it's now time to build this up with myself as my first client, customer, or whatever you may call it. So I really start trying to build up exactly this kind of education course or whatever that matches with my expectations and my demand. Because after all, I'm just a retail investor. Meantime, with decades of experience, but I'm a retail investor. So I also didn't want to book some kind of online course or something for financial professionals, so-called financial professionals, because it's completely different. You learn different things, and that's not relevant for me as a retail investor.